Today we're diving into the future of the Cairns economy, what's driving the area, what business owners should know, and what investors should be looking out for. Joining me today is one of Cairns' leading economists, Peter Faulkner. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
Absolute pleasure having you on. Now, for my audience that may not be familiar with yourself or some of your work, can you give us the 300-foot view, maybe three big points of your career?
3 big points of my career. Wow.
Just to narrow it down.
Yeah, simple question.
Simple question.
Look, I started out originally, I was actually a bond trader, investment banker in the City of London. So I did that for a couple of decades.
Interesting. What period was that?
That was the kind of greed is good, Gordon Gekko, the red braces, the whole bit.
Yep.
One of Thatcher's children. Yeah. So actually entered the City of London just as they had what they called their Big Bang, which was the big deregulation of the City of London.
Yep.
When all the big American banks and the Japanese banks and everything came pouring into London, it all became very money driven. Anyway,
capitalist is its best.
It was, a great place to be, honestly, and a lot of fun when you're, well, what was I then, mid-20s, early 20s.
Was it like the movies?
Yeah, well, it depends which movies you
If
watch.
I'm picturing Wolf of Wall Street?
Yeah. It's not dissimilar. I mean, there's a certain, things like Wolf of Wall Street, there's a certain element, obviously, of poetic license taken there. But yeah, there's certainly elements of that were pretty true.
Yes.
It was a wild ride for a few decades anyway. That was where I started out. And then I ended up actually, I'd always been a scuba diver, but I ended up leaving the city and went off for 10 years traveling the world. So I spent 10 years on the road, working in some places as a dive instructor.
Yep.
We lived in
That's quite a sea change to go from
it was
bond banking to scuba diving.
Scuba diving, yeah. Well, as I say, I'd been a scuba diver for many years, but I got into instructing, particularly kind of conservation work in diving and surveying reefs and stuff like that. So I ended up working on conservation expeditions in Belize, in Fiji, in Indonesia.
And what brought you to Cairns? Was it diving that brought you to Cairns?
Look, Cairns, well, Far North Queensland, the reason we ended up coming to Far North Queensland, having spent those 10 years on the road, was, yes, very much, it was Queensland because of the reef.
And what brought you back into the business world?
That was a kind of, you come out here, we came out here, and I did a bit of dive instruction when I first got here, and then we thought, I'm not getting any younger, we need to do something. So my partner's a chartered accountant, she's also a risk specialist. We'd both had some governance experience, we'd sat on boards and things like that prior to that. So we set up quite a small little boutique business consultancy practice, actually, originally just kind of very much focused on the local area, small businesses, family businesses. We did a bit of community work, stuff like that. And that was nearly 20 years ago. And since then, it's just kind of grown and developed. And it's not grown in scale. It's still just the two of us. But we've kind of become a lot more specialised than we were.
And when you talk specialties, that's sort of where you guys are, or where you're mainly focused at the moment in that economic space? Yeah,
predominantly in economics, cost-benefit analysis, that kind of thing. And my partner is focused more on the kind of risk, financial management, and governance. And we both have board portfolios as well. So we spend more and more percentage of our time actually on our board roles now than we started out with. It was predominantly the consultancy.
Yep.
It's now moved to, it's kind of, for me it's probably 50-50. For my partner it's more like 75-25. She's busy with boards.
Yeah, nice. And speaking economics and economies, I guess that brings us to today's sort of topic where we're talking Cairns, we're talking the Cairns economy, and I guess to start off at sort of a macro level, where do you see Cairns today, and where do you think it's heading over the next decade in regards to its economy, its diversity, its stability, I guess?
Well, I think if you're looking forward a decade, it doesn't hurt to look back a couple of decades. As I say, I've been up here 20 years, so it's not as long as some, but it's a reasonable enough time.
It's a good sample size.
It's a good chunk. And if I look back over 20 years, Cairns has developed enormously. I mean, not just in terms of scale, but in terms of the kind of place that Cairns is.
So when you moved here, I imagine it would have been coming to the end of the Japanese boom when we had...
Yeah, right in, actually just as it was dying, really. So yeah, exactly. It was a very, very tourism-dominated economy. I mean, tourism still obviously significantly important for Cairns. But Cairns has diversified a lot away from simply tourism, and whilst tourism is still arguably one of the top 2 or 3 industry sectors, it's no longer, numero uno as it was probably 20 years ago.
And speaking industry sectors, what would be the top 3 or 4 industry sectors you'd consider in Cairns?
Kind of depends how you measure them.
Yep.
It's always a tricky one, this, when you get asked it, because the data source that you go to is the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they have a classification where they break everything down into a whole bunch of industries. I think there's 19 separate industries. Tourism isn't one of them.
So, how can that be?
So tourism isn't an industry per se. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because the jobs that are within tourism and the value that tourism generates sit within a whole bunch of different other industries. So accommodation and food services, for instance, is a big industry. And especially up here, a lot of tourism jobs sit within that industry. Yep. Arts and recreation is another industry sector. A lot of tourism jobs. Transport, a lot of tourism jobs. But even things like administrative services, I mean, you've got plenty of people who are working in
reservations,
booking clerks, all of that kind of work. That would classify as tourism, but it sits within administration.
Right.
So that's why I say it's confusing, because when I put up a chart and they say, okay, here's the big industries in Cairns, and people look at it and goes, where's tourism? So, well, it's not an industry. So having that caveat aside, the biggest sector, both in terms of the value add to the economy and the number of people employed now, is healthcare and social assistance, no question, and it has been for some time. It wasn't 20 years ago. It is now, and it pretty much is, pick anywhere you want to go in Australia, almost anywhere in the Western world, and that's the case.
Is that the ageing population that's led to that growth, or...?
It's partly that. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. Part of it is the ageing population, yes. Part of it is the fact that healthcare's just got better, so we're all living longer.
Makes sense. If you're dying at 60 versus 90, that's...
And also because treatments get better, treatments get more complex, they become more expensive, you need more specialisation to do them. It used to be, not that long ago, my parents' generation certainly, if you got some form of cancer, it was like, well, see you later, have a nice 6 months or something, and then you're gone. Whereas now it's like, well, it's not going to be nice, but there's a lot of cancers that are at least treatable, if not curable now, and therefore there's a lot of healthcare that goes into that.
So you'd say health is the number one?
Yeah.
Would tourism sit as number 2?
Depends how you measure it, but yes, yes. If you combine all the bits, then tourism's in there as number 2. Construction is a big one.
Yep.
Construction has always been a big one. In terms of value add, construction is actually going backwards, which is interesting, partly because of the productivity crisis that's going on within the construction sector.
We're in a housing crisis. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will describe it as a housing crisis or a rental crisis. Yep. That says to me we need construction, and then construction's in decline.
Well, construction values in
decline. Value adds in decline.
Yeah.
How do those two things sit true at the same time, I guess?
Well, almost one leads to the other. If you've got an industry that is... this idea of decline in value, it's not like we're building fewer houses, but the value add of building those houses is going down because the productivity of the sector is going down.
Can you rephrase that a different way? I think if I'm...
Okay, so it's slightly to do with the fact that the way that we measure economic activity, or certainly one of the ways that we measure economic activity within a region, is what's called gross value add.
Yep.
And gross value add, GVA, essentially looks at what does this sector take in?
Yep.
It adds value to it, and then it creates something, whether it's a service or a good. Now, in the construction sector, what it's taking in is labour, materials, et cetera, builds a house, builds a shopping centre, builds whatever it is the construction sector's built, and then sells that into the market at a particular level. Now, if you've got a very, very, very productive sector, it's not taking much in and it's pumping a lot out, that's going to see a huge uplift of gross value add, yeah?
Yep.
If you've got a sector like construction where productivity has declined massively in the last 10 years, like 50% decline in productivity in 10 years, you're still taking in all those resources, but you're having to take in more to get the same kind of value out. The gross value add therefore decreases.
And is that red tape and green tape causing?
There's a whole bunch of reasons for it, and you know, you had Sarah on the other week. You could have spoken to Sarah about it, and any construction person, any developer would be able to answer these questions for you. But yes, I mean, red tape, certainly the delays around approvals, the costs of development is unquestionable. We've had a huge pickup in building material. We've already talked about that, and you know, it came to light during COVID. Big pickups in labour costs as well. You've mentioned green tape. I mean, red tape, green tape, it all sort of, you know, whether it's green or red is, I guess, depends on which side of the table you're sitting at, really. But controls, you know, restrictions, things that you have to work around to get stuff done, and you combine that with the kind of regulation, the building regulation. I forget that it's like 1,100 pages or something of the building code. I mean, it's just nuts. So, you know, that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. What that means is that it's less productive, or your productivity is lower when you're building. So your costs have gone up, your labour's gone up, all the stuff sitting around it that makes it more expensive has gone up. There's only so much you can pass that on in terms of prices. And again, I heard you talking to Sarah, and I've spoken to James about this as well. It's like I could build, you know, not me, but a developer would say, look, I could build you 20 two-bedroom apartments in the CBD, but I'm going to need to sell each of them for, you know, $2.5 million, and that ain't going to happen.
It's an interesting like contradiction that like people have an issue's probably not the right word, but the reality is housing's borderline unaffordable for a lot of Australians at the moment. Mm-hmm. But we actually need prices to go up to be able to bring more stock to the market on a lot of fronts.
Yeah.
Or would you challenge that?
No, I wouldn't challenge it. I mean, there's always an issue with housing, because everybody says I want housing. Everybody wants.
We want affordable housing.
We want affordable housing. We want our kids to be able to get on the property ladder.
We want to live on Sydney Harbour.
We want to be able to go. We want to buy a house where we want to buy a house, and yada yada yada. And yet, as soon as everybody's in the property market, the one thing they want is house prices to keep going up.
Of course,
they certainly don't want them coming down. Bottom line, housing is no different to anything else. It's a demand and supply equation. In a sense, the demand side is very inelastic because everybody's got to have a place to live. Yeah, it's not like I'm just not going to bother. You know,
I'm not going to take up smoking this week.
Right,
like
you know, or I'll just cut down to only going to the pub, you know, twice a week. I've got to have somewhere to live. Now, okay, I could rent or I could buy. That's a decision. But ultimately,
you still need a house.
Stock. Yeah, we've got to have dwellings for people to live in. So you've got that sort of fixed demand. And if you've got demand that inevitably is going up because our population is growing, and growing quite quickly, then the only thing that you need to see happen is supply goes up. And if you don't, you're going to see prices go. And that's exactly what we've seen, is prices just keep on going up. And why? Because we've got too much demand and not enough supply. And so many, and this is both sides of politics, so I'm not picking out one over the other, and it's both state and federal, there is a very populist thing that you can do, which is to say, we're going to make it easier for people to buy a house, so we're going to reduce the...
Isn't there some great policies that come out of that?
Whatever it is, whatever we're going to do...
5% deposit scheme.
Right, 5% deposit schemes.
Let's increase the demand.
For first home owners, or whatever it is, whatever you do, all you're doing at the bottom level is pumping up demand. That's all you're doing. And then you sit there and go, oh, I didn't expect that. The prices have gone up. You're like, well, what do you think's going to happen? I mean, seriously. So genuinely, the only solution to that housing situation is more supply. So the question then becomes, well, who's supplying it?
Yep.
And then it's either the private sector or it's the public sector.
And you spoke...
Or both.
You spoke earlier about the private sector and the fact that the profit margins aren't there currently to build and supply extra properties. Mm-hmm. You know, there's developers chopping up blocks and selling house and land packages in Cairns. Yep. That's certainly doable, but in regards to building apartments on scale, it's not going to happen at the moment.
No. Which again, I mean, I hate going back to the previous episode because it's going to make it sound like Sarah was more interesting than I am. But the reality is, part of the reason that Skyhaven got off the ground, excuse the pun, is that it sits on the land that is controlled by the Cairns Airport.
Yep.
And that made it feasible. If that block of land had not been on Cairns Airport but stuck in the CBD somewhere, it wouldn't be happening.
Which, is interesting. And I think that's where we talk about government policies fueling demand. At some point, they have to realise that the supply and even the timeframes to get approvals for projects through council, that all just restricts supply. At some point, common sense has to prevail, and they have to maybe reduce building codes, not to make buildings unsafe, but we look at all the energy efficiency stuff that come in over a period of time there, that all added to the costs of a house. So to take a step back probably isn't going backwards to be able to actually make housing slightly more affordable while removing some of those sort of restrictions.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not a developer, so I don't know what's in the code per se. What I suspect, and this happens not just in construction, but it happens everywhere, is that when you have a set of regulations, and you put them in place 20 years ago, it's very, very difficult to remove regulations. It's very easy to add new ones. So it just gets built up and built up and built up and becomes this horribly complex, rocky thing. And we've also got the issue, and this is something I know that the federal government are trying to work on now, is this duplication where you've got state and federal and local, and they're all kind of piled on top of each other. And it's all happened kind of organically over the space of decades. So I think there probably is scope, and again, I don't know what it is because I don't know what the answer is, but I'm sure that there is scope to look at those kind of regulations and say, look, we can actually streamline some of this. We can find efficiencies, not necessarily by reducing standards or by allowing people to clear rainforests to build car parks. We can do stuff that will make it more efficient and therefore cheaper and therefore quicker for people without necessarily removing all of the good stuff.
Agreed. To take a step back there, because we sort of segued off onto a pretty interesting topic, but looking back at the Cairns economy, we sort of spoke about where it is today and the fact that health sector is such a big factor. Tourism's a big factor. Construction's a big factor, even with it not providing a whole lot of economic value there. It is a big economic driver in the economy. Where do you see the change happening over the next 5 to 10 years? Or do you think we're going to stay relatively the status quo, I guess, in Cairns?
Look, I think it's probably true that those three sectors will remain core. I mean, that I think is a given almost. Where I think is interesting is those sectors where we've already started to see some real growth and some diversification for the Cairns economy as a whole. So I'm thinking there are things like the aviation sector, the marine sector, the stuff that's going on in Portsmouth with people like Norship and Ostal and all of that, and of course HMAS Cairns, to a lot of people is kind of hidden away.
100%.
It's stuck away over there on the inlet. Nobody really knows what's going on. And yet there's an enormous amount of stuff that's happening there, really high quality advanced manufacturing, exports, high quality manufacturing exports, engineering exports that are going out of Cairns to Papua New Guinea, in Southeast Asia to South Pacific. You've obviously got all of the stuff that's going on over at the airport. I mean, not just the airport, but the aviation sector more generally. So the western side of the airport, which will at some point be moving over to the eastern side of the airport. There's an enormous amount of really exciting
a lot of employment there.
Yeah, huge. A lot of value, and it's grown enormously. And it ties in with one of the other sectors that I think is really interesting, and that's the education sector. Because we've got a lot of engineering, particularly aviation engineering training that goes on over on the general aviation side. We've got the same in the marine sector. We've got 2 universities. We've got a very strong TAFE sector. We've got all of these
and even
English
the
language
universities that are expanding quickly. You look at the new JCU building opposite the hospital there.
Yeah. Well, and CQU about to break ground on the Hartley Street block.
But all that adds up. All that adds up to a strengthening and more diverse economy, I guess. It moves us away from, when you moved to Cairns 20 years ago, we were really reliant on tourism. The airline strike is a great example of that. Cairns basically got crippled overnight because of the pilot strike, and now we've moved to a point where even when tourism shut down over COVID, it very much felt like the city was still alive and well there. Like we still seem to be ticking along for a good period of time until it all opened back up.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good example, actually, the difference between the pilot strike and what happened in COVID. Because as you say, pilot strike came along, Cairns basically sort of pulled the shutters down and went, well, that's us done. when COVID hit, if you remember, there was a famous quote actually from Alan Kohler, who I normally quite like, but he was talking absolute garbage at this point. And he said Cairns is basically going to shut down. That's the end of Cairns. And the quote was, "There will be tumbleweeds blowing down the main street of Cairns."
Interesting perspective.
Right, that's what he said as COVID hit. And of course, the complete opposite was true. I mean, obviously there was the dip.
There was a moment in time. There was a month or so where the whole of Australia, the whole world for that moment in time. Yeah,
exactly. But then domestic tourism took over, and Cairns actually boomed through COVID. We had some of the fastest growth that we've seen in this city. And the tourism sector in particular. Now, some of the tourism businesses did really, really badly and hurt. But if you were focused predominantly on the international market, so most of the reef fleet, for instance, got smashed. I mean, no question. I don't want to downplay the kind of pain that a lot of those businesses went through. But when you consider the domestic side of the equation, things were very strong, very strong.
All the hotels bounced back to really solid occupancy.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, I think like June we shut down, and by the end of the year, that Christmas, we were back at,
Pretty much. I mean, domestic tourism went through the roof. And not just in Cairns as well, but regionally.
And with that become a lot of migration post then. You know, we saw a lot of interstate migration over that period of time, a lot of people moving up from Victoria in particular.
Yep.
Which was really the start of our property boom, that sort of 2020 market.
Yeah.
Post-lockdown was when it really all started to hit the ground running. Moving forward, technology's always played a big role in economies, and right now it seems we're like on the precipice with AI and the way that automation's changing the way many people both operate in business, plus how they live their day-to-day lives. Do you think that will have a positive or a negative effect on sort of regional cities?
I think it's going to be positive, and I think it's positive not just in regional cities. I actually think it's positive right the way across the economy.
Yeah, interesting.
There's some brilliant work done. If people are interested in this, they should jump onto the Jobs and Skills Australia website, who have produced some phenomenally detailed reports, and they're quite readable. I mean, I know it's economics, but it's not all boring. There's actually they've done
quite
some
readable, well put.
Yeah, exactly. They've done some really, really good. There's lots of pictures. You'll love it. They've done some really good work looking at the impact of AI on specific occupations. So they've basically looked at all of the occupations, and they've said, how exposed is this occupation to either automation, so the robots are coming for my job, or augmentation, i.e. I can do this job much better, more productively than I have ever done it before using AI.
And I think that's a really important definition there, understanding those two different concepts, because one is you lose your job, one is you do your job 10 times better possibly.
And therefore become even more valuable. That's the crucial thing. It's not just that I'll keep my job because I can do it with AI, but actually my job becomes more valuable because I'm 10x times as productive, let's say. Therefore, I'm worth more. Yeah.
And on balance, if we look at the whole economy, sounds like net sum, that's a positive where we're heading.
Massive positive. So the Jobs and Skills Australia have kind of looked at all these occupations. They then weighted them by the number of people doing the occupations and taken all these exposure scores and yada yada, bit of statistics. The score, if you like, that they come out with at the end, so it's a 0 to 1. 1 is you're absolutely 100% exposed to either automation or augmentation. And it works out that the automation score is about 0.35. I'm thinking from memory here, but it's about 0.35. The augmentation score is about 0.65. So it's almost twice. So what they're saying is if we look at across the economy as a whole, jobs are twice as exposed to being augmented as they are to being automated.
And I guess we can go back a step to the 90s and look what the internet did for a lot of workforces.
Sure.
Not most people, there's a big portion of the population that now work from a laptop or a computer most of their day.
Yep.
So not most, but there's a big portion. Those jobs didn't exist pre-90s, or they existed in a very different fashion.
Yeah.
That the productivity went through the roof with the invention of the internet.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, from what you're saying, is maybe where we're sitting today and looking, into the future, we're sitting at that point where the jobs will almost be unrecognisable another 10, 15 years into the future. as people implement AI and utilise it more.
Yeah, look, and that's happened, throughout time. I mean, as soon as they, developed the combustion engine, it was like, we're all going to lose our job because we're not going to be riding horses anymore. And you're like, well,
now not everyone's farmers.
Things change. The spinning jenny came along, and the automated weaving and all of this kind of stuff. And at the time, it was always going to be, it's doom and gloom. It's going to be terrible. Nobody's going to have a job. And of course, that never happened. Same thing with electricity. Same thing with steam engines. Same thing with the internet. And it's going to be the same thing with AI. What will happen is there will be a change. Unquestionably, there will be a change. What these exposure scores seem to be saying and really demonstrating is that some things actually won't be that impacted at all. Other things will be very, very impacted. But where the impacts exist, they're actually much more heavily weighted towards augmentation, i.e. opportunity, rather than automation threat. And it varies from industry to industry. The kind of two classics that I tend to point out to people is the construction sector, given we've spoken about the construction sector. So the construction sector has a much, much lower automation exposure, which makes sense.
It's complicated, it's manual.
You're not going to see robots building houses anytime soon. There might be a bit of help with some of it, but you're not going to see people...
Still feels like it's a while away.
Yeah, right, clambering all over scaffolding, that ain't happening. So the automation score is very low. Interestingly, the augmentation score is also lower, although it's still about twice the automation score. The automation score. I wish they would have used different letters to start. Anyway, so the construction sector, less exposed with threat, but also less opportunity. Then you look at something like the professional services sector, much higher automation score, because a lot of the kind of grunt work, data work, is going to be 100%. Automated. It can be It's already being.
It already is. Yeah.
If you need somebody to just churn through doing bookkeeping or something, that's going to get automated. But equally, the augmentation score is that much higher as well, because if you're a skilled professional and you can really tap into the augmentation component of AI, you become phenomenally. You
can do
productive.
So much more work in an hour. Yeah. So much more work. And bring it back to Cairns. Do you see that being, net score, it sounds like it's going to be a positive for the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
For regional areas in Cairns, do you think that's going to have like a boost in remote workers?
So it's interesting because they have actually done this scoring at the regional level as well. And there's a couple of interesting points about that. The first is that if you plot it as a chart, kind of automation, augmentation on your X and Y, it's a positively sloping line. So the more exposed to automation you are, also the more exposed to augmentation. It's not a one or the other, it's both or neither.
And I think that construction example is a good one of that.
Exactly.
Versus your professional services.
Exactly. So for a start, there's a positively sloping score. Cairns sits about in the middle of the line, which makes it's not a surprise to anybody really. It's about
diverse economy, mix of construction,
exactly.
Mix of professional services.
Exactly. What is interesting is that capital city regions, so all of what are called the SA4, the statistical area 4s within the capital cities, all sit upper right of the line, and all the regions sit lower left of the line. And the more regional you become, the further down the line you go.
Is that blue collar, white collar? Is that sort of one way to think about it?
Yeah, it's kind of that, exactly that. And again, if you think of the extremes, then it kind of makes sense. So if you think of the extreme in terms of the most kind of metropolitan, non-rural, non-regional SA4, it's somewhere like Sydney inner city, right? That's all your professional, your finance.
People working in high rises.
Right.
A lot of computer work.
Very exposed to augmentation, but also quite exposed to that entry-level automation.
Yep.
They sit right up at the top right.
Yep.
If you think at the other end, I think the lowest one is northern outback WA.
Farmers,
like I mean, there's probably only about 7 people there anyway. But what they're doing out there is going to be very
mining work,
hands-on agriculture. Maybe it's not going to be stuff that's going to be either automated or augmented much. So they sit right at the bottom. And as you say, Cairns, not surprisingly, we're a diverse, semi-regional city. I say semi-regional because we're definitely not as regional as we used to be. And we kind of sit pretty much smack bang in the middle.
Makes a lot of sense. And looking into the future, There's a lot of forecasts doing the rounds at the moment around population growth and, looking at the way our economy is growing, looking at those sort of major sectors, looking at AI coming into it. The forecasts are currently sitting around that 1 to 1.5% per annum growth. Do you think that's realistic based on past population growth and what we're seeing in the economy?
No, frankly. So just to break it down, so what we're talking about here is the what is currently the draft FNQ plan.
Correct.
Which got released, last week or the week before?
Correct.
And you've all got about 3 minutes to respond to it.
Okay, great. Cheers, guys.
So what underlies any kind of significant planning, and this is a 20-year plan, basically. So anything that is looking forward that long, the number one driver that feeds into that equation is going to be how many people are going to be here.
Yep.
That's the thing you need to know, because that will feed to how many hospital beds do we need, how many schools are we going to have, how many houses, how much roads, how much water, how much everything are we going to need if the population is going up by X. So that's a really crucial driver. The FNQ plan talks about a range of growth between 1 and 1.5%. Now that doesn't sound much. 0.5%, what's that? It's actually a huge difference because it compounds every year.
Yes.
So the difference between 1% compounded for 20, I don't need to tell a property investor about compounding rates.
Was it Einstein, or was it the compound interest is the greatest wonder of the world, or something along those lines?
Exactly. So, you take 1% and compound it for 20 years, you get about 22%. Take 1.5% and compound it for 20 years, and you get 35% or something.
It's a big difference.
It's a big difference. So the plan says we are considering a range of 1 to 1.5%. There's an issue there that their starting point is 21 data, which seems crazy to me because we've already got 24, but putting that aside.
Yeah, 3 years behind the 8 ball.
3 years where we've grown at more than 1.5% per annum as well, so they're already ignoring that. But anyway, put that aside. The plan then specifically talks about actually 1%. It kind of talks about this vague range, but then when it comes to here's the number of what we're expecting is 1%. If we look at what's happened over the past 20 years, this is a 20-year plan, so it makes sense to look
back 20 years. Yeah, history leaves clues.
We've grown at 1.5%, or close enough, 1.47 or something for those 20 years on average. Again, compounding. It's even higher if you look at the Cairns local government area specifically. It's closer to 1.75%, 1.8% every year for the last 20 years. So Cairns is becoming a bigger component of the region as a whole, both in population but also in the size of its economy. So it's becoming more and more dominant.
And define those areas. So when you talk Cairns, we're talking Palm Cove to Gordonvale?
So that's a good point. We should probably define this. The FNQ plan, for some reason known only to Queensland government, includes, I think it's 8 local government areas. So
it's quite a big, a huge catchment then.
It is, but a lot of them are tiny. So Etheridgeshire, for some reason, is in there. There's
where's that?
400 people or something.
Where is that?
Out west.
Okay.
So that's included. Cairns Regional Council, Cassowary Coast Regional Council, Tablelands, Mareeba, Douglas Shire.
Yes, okay.
And Yarrabah.
And
then Wudjil. That's 8. There you go. So that's the FNQ. That's what the draft plan is.
And that's what's been growing at about 1.5%?
Yes.
But then when you look at Cairns, Cairns
LGA. So if we look at the local government area.
And Cairns LGA, can we define that?
So Cairns LGA runs from Palm Cove essentially down to where's it get to? Mirrawinny?
Yep.
And then out.
And that's grown at 1.8%.
1.75, 1.8, yeah.
Which that's quite a big, talking compound growth once again, that's a big difference, even 1.5 versus 1.8.
Absolutely. And the reason that the region as a whole has only grown at 1.5, when Cairns, which is between 2/3 and 3/4 of the region anyway, has grown so fast, is that everywhere else is basically treading water or growing very slowly. So places like Cassowary Coast, has been just under 30,000 people for a long time and has barely moved. The other ones often, Mareeba and Tablelands are exceptions in that they're slightly bigger, but they've not been growing fast either. Places like Etheridge and Wudjil and Yarrabah. I mean, the numbers are so
That makes sense.
insignificant.
Yep.
Even Douglas Shire is so small, it doesn't really impact on the total.
Yeah, okay. That all makes sense. You've got Cairns holding the majority of the population, so it really sort of, even taking into account that 1.8 versus 1.5, they're also going to be taking that into account when they're looking at building infrastructure, where that infrastructure is going to be needed.
Yes. But they're still underestimating. So the plan as a whole is talking about 1%. Whereas actually, the part of the reason they're talking about 1% is that they specifically say, oh, well, historically, we've only grown at 1%. And you're like, only if you look at the very recent past.
You go back to the 1200s and call it 0.1%, like, choose your time period and it becomes irrelevant.
If you look at the last 10 years, it's 1.1%.
Yep.
But within that 10-year period, there was something called COVID.
Yeah.
And COVID shut borders. We rely a lot of our growth comes from not only interstate but international migration. And if you close your borders, both internationally and at your state level, all of that stops.
So fast forwarding 20 years,
Yeah.
and they base all the infrastructure on 1%, but we actually hit 1.5%. What does that look like? Does that then...
About 50,000 people short.
That's a lot. And in real terms, does that then slow population growth because there isn't the resources here for the population to move into in regards to hospitals, schools?
That's a good question, and that's part of the whole problem is that you need... So infrastructure, you need infrastructure when you've got your population, but you need the infrastructure before you get the population. It needs to be there to enable...
Somewhat chicken or an egg, but you clearly know that you need the infrastructure before the population.
If you're constantly chasing your tail in terms of, going, oh, geez, we need a new hospital, you don't just click your fingers and build a new hospital. That's a long-term thing. As Cairns has been finding out, our water security isn't up to scratch because we've grown so quickly. That takes a long time to bring online. So there is a kind of chicken and egg situation here, is that if you don't invest, if you look at growth and you say, okay, well, we think it's only going to be 1%, therefore we only need to do this, and this amount of infrastructure, and then growth starts to pick up beyond your 1.5%, suddenly all your infrastructure is creaking at the seams because it can't handle all the extra people.
So in real terms, what happens when the government gets these predictions wrong is they somewhat stall growth. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, they stall growth, they make growth more difficult, and in a sense they can almost become self-fulfilling.
Yep.
Because if you don't invest, people won't move here, therefore you'll get the lower growth, the lower population growth that you were thinking about, and they'll turn around and say, oh, we were right all along.
Right all along. That makes sense. And I guess with that as well, like we look at the housing market, and it's similar in the way that there is a housing shortage across Australia, but Cairns is not immune to that. Cairns is also unique in the fact that we don't have a whole lot of spare land up our sleeve. We are confined by the ocean and the mountain range and so on and so forth. Housing's similar. Like we look at those population growth numbers, and without the housing to support it, I guess we're stuck in a similar situation where we're restricted for growth. And then in real terms, I guess that means for businesses, it becomes harder to hire staff, and challenges of operating profitable businesses become more.
Yeah, harder to hire staff, harder to retain staff. That's another big one. And it just becomes more and more difficult for people to come up here. Not only more expensive, it's not even necessarily, in many cases, it's not a question of the expense. It's simply a question of there is nowhere. I've spoken to a lot of business owners, I'm sure you have as well, who have had a skills requirement, and the skills, whatever it is they're looking for, simply aren't available here. So there's that issue as well. There's the skills shortage issue. They had to go outside the region to recruit. They found somebody. They bring them up from Melbourne, let's say. They bring them up. Maybe a couple of weeks later, their family comes up with 2 or 3 kids and the dog and whatever. And they're staying in an Airbnb or they're staying in a hotel while they find somewhere to live. 6 months later, they're still in the Airbnb or they're still in the hospital, and the wife is going, this is nuts. Or the husband, I shouldn't say this there. The partner is saying, this is crazy. I can't live in an Airbnb or a hotel for the rest of my life. And they leave.
It is a challenge. And Is there a straightforward answer to that? We spoke earlier.
Build more houses.
Build more, and that's supply.
That's it.
That supply makes sense. And I just sort of, as you're talking about interstate migration and overseas migration and that whole sort of chicken and egg conversation, when it comes to immigration, international immigration at the moment, it's obviously a pretty hotly contested issue with the number of immigration numbers currently happening.
Yep.
When it comes to skilled labour and a functioning economy, is that something we need to continue to facilitate in order for our economies to continue to grow?
Yeah. Bottom line, yes. It needs to be controlled. I mean, I'm certainly not somebody who just says, just throw the borders open and just let the hordes come in. That's certainly not the reality. And of course, that isn't the reality anyway. Everybody knows that, or I say everybody.
Most people should know that.
Most people should know it, yeah. A lot of the immigration that comes in is skilled migration. It's exactly the kind of people we want. It's nurses, it's doctors, it's policemen, it's economists. So there's a lot of skilled migration that comes in, and that's exactly what we need. The challenge with immigration, one is getting the level right.
Yep.
And that, to a certain degree, comes back to this whole kind of infrastructure thing. And what has happened with, historically at least has happened, is that international immigrants tend to settle in the major urban centres. They go to Melbourne, they go to Sydney, they go to Brisbane, and a few other places. But basically those three, that's where they go. And those cities already are struggling with infrastructure challenges. I mean, go to Melbourne at the moment, the place is falling to pieces. And it's only getting worse. And it's the same everywhere. So you're getting massive traffic issues. You've got, again, housing issues. The whole kind of infrastructure is falling to pieces. So there is a pushback, understandable pushback saying, hang on, we're full. We can't have any more people. This is crazy. But the country as a whole actually benefits from that migration. And this kind of irony is that so many of the regional areas, and Cairns being one of them, is sitting there going, we could grow more.
Yep.
In fact, we want to grow more. We want some more people, particularly skilled migrants. Send them our way. Yes, please.
And what do we need to do to become attractive?
Well, that's,
is that salaries?
It's a political issue to an extent. And there has been political efforts made to try and steer international migrants into regional areas. There's been incentives. You hear about doctors, for instance, there's an incentive for them to go and work in a regional centre for a year or whatever it is, but then they tend to come back. So there are things you can do around incentive. I would be more kind of prescriptive, if you like, and I would be saying to international migrants, if you want to come into Australia, that's great. We welcome you, particularly if you're a skilled migrant. We'd love you to come. But you will live in the region. This is not a negotiable. It's not you have to do 6 months and then you can do whatever you want. It's on your transition to citizenship, which is 4 or 6 years, you will be regionally based.
And the thing is, there's already a precedent for that. We've already had our working holiday visas. They had their 180-day, I forget what the number was, but they had to do regional work for a certain period to qualify for their second-year visa.
Correct.
So it's already been done. So it's not like that's a crazy new concept that hasn't been trialled before. So, that's certainly one possible pathway that is worth considering.
Look, I think so. I mean, there are obviously challenges, and people say, oh, yeah, but once they're here and they've got their right to be here, that we shouldn't be tying them down to living, they should be free to go wherever they want. And I get that. I mean, I was a migrant here myself, 20 years ago, but I had to live in Queensland for 4 years, I think, something like that, on the particular visa that I came in on. But I could go anywhere I wanted in Queensland at the time. And then obviously once you get your citizenship, clearly you can go wherever you want. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to, chain people to Cairns.
But I guess what it does, if you're making people live in a certain area for a certain period of time, which is probably fair, it's a political debate, but it's probably fair, they're going to build roots in that area. Right. They're going to create friends, they're going to create workplaces, they're going to invest in that local area, they're going to be part of the schools.
Yeah.
The chance that they're going to stick in that area,
much higher.
Much higher.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. But you've also got to create the opportunities. I mean, that's the other part. You can't just force them to do it.
There needs to be work there.
There needs to be work. There needs to be housing. It needs to be a nice place for people to want to live. And I think Cairns has gone a long way to doing that. Let's be fair. 20 years ago, there'll be people who will say, I much preferred Cairns 20 years ago and it was a quiet, sleepy little town. That's fair enough. But nowadays, Cairns is a far more metropolitan, cosmopolitan. It's got a great art scene. It's got the best coffee in Australia. We've got good restaurants. Yada yada yada. The list goes on and on. It's become a far more attractive place for people to live than it was 20 years ago, in my opinion.
I think that's a fair opinion.
I think it's a fair opinion. There'll be old Cairns locals who vehemently
challenge and disagree with that,
which is fair enough. But clearly, there's challenges and all the rest of it. You can talk about that. But the reality is that Cairns has become a far more of a cosmopolitan, global city that has a lot of the stuff that people would want to see when they move into a city.
It's probably a big part of the reason why Cairns local government area has grown so much faster than those slightly more regional hubs. People want to be near all those amenities. I know for myself, I love living here because of all that is on offer in such a small space.
Yeah.
Versus living in a regional area where I've got to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to go to a nice restaurant or, to all of those other options.
Yeah.
As a final question, going back at 18, I imagine you were living in England at the time. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give yourself? What would you tell 18-year-old you? It might be one sentence. It might be slightly more convoluted.
I mean, I guess what you're asking is, what have you learned?
What have you learned?
Yeah. Over those 50-odd years since you were 18. And the thing I've learned, I think, is that things can happen that you have no way of knowing are going to happen. And planning is great. I mean, I'm a business consultant. I talk about business planning all the time. That's, you need to plan, and you need to plan your life to a degree. But I think what you have to really, really be aware of is that things will just come out of left field and things can change. At the flip of a switch, things can change. So you need to be open to those kind of opportunities when they come, because they are opportunities. They're an opportunity to do something else. There's a great book, I don't know if you've ever read Antifragility by Talib Nassim.
No, you should. I'll add it to my list.
Very, very good. It's become almost the kind of mantra for us, both in our personal life but also in our business life, is this idea of antifragility. And antifragility talks about not just being, when people think about what's the opposite of fragile, they say things like robust or tough or that's not actually the opposite. That's just something different. The opposite is anti-fragility. And what anti-fragility means is that when you get stressed and strained or hit problems, you don't just plow through, you actually get stronger. It makes you stronger. You build more resilience the more subjected to those shocks you are. So I think that's what I would have said. It wouldn't have been written when I was 18. It would have been a shame. Maybe I should have written it.
I love that though. And I think that's anyone that's been in business, anyone that's had investments for a period of time, anyone that's even almost been in the workforce for a while, you do get hit with these different challenges. And the ones that succeed and push through learn to adapt and build on those challenges so that the next time that same thing happens, it really feels like a speed bump rather than a life-altering occasion. And that's something, we see so often in different investments, different businesses, these challenges that the first time you hit with them, you're like, oh my God, the world's going to end.
Yeah.
And then you get hit by them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times more. It's like, it's just another Wednesday.
Or you realise that actually it was an opportunity all along.
Agreed.
And you're actually better for it having happened, not just that you got over it and you're like, oh, thank God that's in the background. You're actually, thank God that happened. That's brilliant, because that really changed my life, or it made things better.
Agreed. Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.
That was great.